This draw along session is on the Rietveld Schroder house in Utrecht, Holland. It was designed by Gerrit Rietveld for a woman named Schroder with her children. This is Truus Schroder and her 3 kids. It's predicated on the notion of neoplasticism, which is from a group, it's nomenclature of a title of a magazine called De Stijl, which was first published by the painter Theo van Doesburg. Also with the painter Piet Mondrian and the architects Van Doesburg and Gerrit Rietveld. And it postulates a movement where each art form must realize its own nature based on its materials and codes. And as spiritual awareness of society increases, so will art fulfill its historical destiny and become absorbed into daily life. So much like the rules and regulations put forth by the years the Bauhaus was opened, under Walter Gropius through to Mies van der Rohe, this is a similar type of parallel program coming out of Holland at the time. It's not considered one of the modern masters because they didn't build to the level and degree or impact people directly through education. But this one small addition, a very modest home in Holland, has been a spectacle in the lexicon of modern architecture. So we're looking at the Schroder edition, and we'll watercolor this today. We're going to start with its language of planes in space. Again, probably learned from Frank Lloyd Wright, as Wright is a bit of a hero to the young Dutch architects. And if we look over at the photograph over here, we see the architecture kind of exploding out from the box. So breaking the box and have the planes flow into space, they really broke this down to a derivative composition of red, yellow, and blue. Piet Mondrian, you've probably seen some of his artwork, the abstraction of nature into primary colors and supportive grays, blacks, and whites. So we are going to reverse our process here. Instead of starting with the grays, we're going to start with the spectacle of color on our plate here. And so we can hold those sort of in a superlative realm and then use the grays around to finish the form work and create the volume. So our view will be simply from the addition. We'll rotate to the third side here. Here's the blank wall that faces the existing residence. And so this is joined on the intersection of 2 streets, a very sort of small lot, so that it has 3 open sides to it. And so here's the addition break line that now opens up the home towards this sort of formal city view, which is probably the most photographed part of the elevation. So we'll make it 3-dimensional by rotating it here. And our view, as you see by the line drawing behind it, is right from about here. She commissioned the house to be designed preferably without walls, and using Rietveld's ideas of espoused progressive, a language of a fierce commitment to the new openness about relationships within their own family. So rather than break them down into bourgeois notions of respectability and propriety, the discipline, hierarchy, and containment would be eliminated throughout the design. So hypothetically, the house could be one single space or with movable panels, and the language of the planes performing spatial ideas inside the box, it could then ratify itself to multiple conditions. It makes no attempt to relate to its neighboring buildings. It's very, to this day, striking on the set of Utrecht in Holland. There's no static accumulation of rooms by dynamic, changeable, open zone. So let's start by looking at those primary colors on this site. So if you can get your small round pen with your inks here, and we'll start with maybe some residual red from the past drawing. And we'll find the zones here that activate that red on our site. So since it's kind of a brilliant red, you might want to mix the red-orange you might have with straight earthen red. to get something fairly vibrant. And then we'll press that. Test that on our sheet. You see if that'll be bold enough. I think I'll bring a little bit more of the more brilliant orange red into it. A little more water here. That looks a little bit better to bring some orange into the red. Okay. And so I'll guide you through this since the photograph is black and white. This one vertical strut supporting this great white plane above the entry is a red column. And we'll give it value later on once it sets up to show it more three-dimensionally. And then up here on the second floor in the horizontal realm, again, to play with that X, Y, and Z axis whenever they have the chance. We'll have a red plane go behind the open window here. So when the windows open up in their movement, they actually play with that X, Y, and Z plane too. So in a sense, there's some kinetic language of movement. And when it comes to the edge of the home proper, then it actually pokes beyond it to break that plane of the box. And then every facade will have that relationship of some key element of the red involved there. Now, if we shift over to the blue, and we could start maybe with something in our hands from a prior sketch, but make this a bit more of a vibrant blue since it isn't going to be a natural sky. It is the core blue of all color palettes, the primary blue, red, and yellow. And we'll test that blue next to the red here to make sure it's very vibrant. That looks pretty close to what we're looking for. And a little bit of water, so it's got a little sense of transparency to it. And now in the front here, we'll find a blue element that rises above the lower plane. One that pokes around past this front white plane here. So obviously it's coming from the other side and wrapping around. And then finally, the throw of the chimney up above is also a vertical plane rising up. Our second primary. And our last piece we're going to address now will be the yellow. So I will clear out part of the pad area here. And we'll test out that yellow next to our blue and red and make sure it's got that primary sense to it. I think I'll make it a little more golden instead of lemon yellow. There we go. I found it now. And then those points are the upper deck, balcony plane, It projects out from the living space up above. And then very tightly through the rails for that balcony. Project back and are anchored to the front plane of the home. And that's all we'll see from this elevation until, in terms of the play of that. The rest are going to be blacks, whites, and then in between all the gray areas. So before we get started on those planes, which will simply articulate sort of almost like a two-dimensional Mondrian painting that's come into the third dimension. So architecture activates the Z-axis. We're going to simply complete the planes. Then we'll push our ability to use shade and shadow to develop sort of the volumetric interplay of the interior space with the exterior. So parallel to this, obviously, is the work of Gerrit Rietveld, who also got into, beyond the architecture of this house, got into a lot of furniture design, interiors, had a long career, took him into the 60s. And probably one of his most provocative pieces was the red and blue chair. And so in furniture, the design language of de style then was to take those planes in space and abstract the notion of what is key elements to the architecture of being seated, because furniture often takes on the character of sort of the built environment architecturally because it has the same three key aspects to it. It has to have purpose. This is a residence. This is a place to sit. It has to have structure to keep the person off the ground and support them, just like the architecture has structure. Then it has to have art to it. And that's what sort of separates those three pieces from engineering or other parts of design industry. But architecture has the realm of those three, and the chair has the same type of design qualities as that. So you can see sort of relationship between all of the things these three gentlemen were thinking about in terms of their movement based on materials and the codes of generative space. So that's referred to as the red and blue chair. So we do have some pools residual from the last drawing in the realm of grays, so we can use those as a base and build up to, we'll start with the dark at the base here, and then we'll add water to it to create different levels and tiers of gray as we move back into space and leave the white, obviously page white. So this will cover a greater zone, so we will make it a fluid base if possible, and then start to add a bit of our blacks and blues in there. And then to wash it quick, we'll move to the medium-sized chisel tip brush. Okay, let's give it a check for tone. That'll be the gray adjacent to the colors. And now we'll use our chisel to move that across this bottom plane. Do a quick wet wash on a dry backdrop, creates that plane. And on the side over here, it goes around the corner. We'll change the value of it a little bit later with shade and shadow, but for now, we'll simply continue that, as this corner then also has that same gray wrapping around to the right. Now, if we neutralize this and make it a little bit lighter tone, see by adding water to it, more transparent. We'll start up here to the upper left because we don't want to touch this wash yet with more water on these planes until they've dried out. So we'll come over here and do a lighter gray, which will set off this front white plane. And there's one with this window opening. We see through it to the plane behind it. And it's got, a black frame to it, which will come in with later when we detail the image out. And then planes beneath it. A lot of this is going to be interior light as we move into the space, but we'll use a gray plane here and then back in. And again, to make this white seem more dominant, obviously the interiors will be a darker tone as we start to break that box and move back into the space. Up top, this top plane. It's a gray tone on its front and then drops down as a plane and moves back into the building. So whatever, it's not ornamental decoration of just the outside skin. It's treating the entire plane as a three-dimensional form moving through the home. Now it'll carry out over to this little projection of roof on the back level. Okay, now this is set up and dry enough to take that lighter tone of gray in this midsection panel as well. And now we're going to work with that pool and pull some of the water out of it and then add more just pigment of sort of the gray black to make something more opaque. And now we'll highlight the frames of all the windows being jet black. We could probably add a little bit of blue to that, but not too much. And we're not going to make it completely opaque. It'll be enough water in it so it's got some transparency to it, because even the black will shine as a lighter tone when we have our light, shade, and shadow applied to this. Let's check out the depth of that now next to the rest. And so this will be the detail of the language of the hard architecture in terms of steel structure for the glazing. So we'll come to the frames of the windows here that we've drawn in so far. And with the tip of our round brush, just painting those frames that are black. This will be nice because it floats over the white plane. And the frame for the window above. And the windows and doors on the second floor. And the frame on this front door. And now right in the center of the home is the very large bar that helps support the corner of the projected balcony. That's a big vertical black element. And the frame of the window down below here. And we'll let those set up for a second, and then we'll do a little bit of the context here, which is the relationship of these man-made planes in space and sort of the treed landscape around it. So we're going to abstract that a little bit so it isn't too realistic. So we can first come in with our pencil stock and just sort of shape that out. So to pull the essay off the backdrop here, we're going to add in planes of space of the more mature trees from the original housing district where this is an addition to. And that is simply at the original home that Mrs. Schroder owned, and now this extension out here, this addition to her home. Here are the mature trees for that lot. That'll simply come down to grade, and then the property comes up to the edge of this horizon line on both sides. So that's the ground plane. So it'll be more like smaller trees or shrubbery at the base here, and then lawn of the flat plane coming up to the addition. And then that'll be a sky above, and over on the right, it'll do something similar where the tree will come up and again frame this edge building with an open window over here. So we'll see through that to the glazing and then down to the right in the base over here. So it's just a simple kind of light wash of a nice treed green. We'll give that value to pull this whole aspect off the paper. So in one of your pools of mixing over here, I'm going to build out the type of leaf green you'd like. And it'll be a big wash here, so add enough water to carry that. And once you feel like you've established enough paint stock, just check it on your secondary paper first before you apply it. And a good way to tone it down from being too brilliantly green, a little bit more natural, is to add some of your red stock from the floor. And make sure there's enough water to push this around. And now we'll do a test of that green. And so that'll be the backdrop. It's actually sort of contrarian to their view at this style to never employ green in architecture because it seems like it's from another world of design language. So that's why they stick to the primary colors. So let's try with our mid-range chisel. Come in here and edge the building. And that's probably good enough to hold us for now in terms of just a placeholder of the composition for the sketch here. Now it'd be nice to sort of take a little more of a brilliant green. So start with green proper and maybe add a little bit of our warm yellow to it for the grass plane. So on either side of the walkway leading to the home, there are tiers of lines of planted grass that goes back in perspective towards our horizon line. And that'll help sit the building down on a plane. And then take that over to the right side, because then we'll have this secondary over on the right in shade. So it'll go deeper in tone as we add the blue cast shadow onto it. We still want to pull some of the movement of that flat plane towards us. So we'll break this plane later with tone and reinforce that. So now we've got our back wall of tone, and we'll give some value and form to that as we move along. And now we can start to cloak the whole composition with our series of shades and shadows. So black to the blue, back to the blue zone. We'll have to mix a lot because we're going to cover a lot of material with it. So it's a concentration of blues and blue blacks, and we'll make them very transparent in the beginning here, so it still lets the form show behind it. Then we'll, much like we did with the other media, is we'll move to darker tones and subsequent washes on top of that. So let's check that blue black again. Similar to the earlier one we used. It's a bit more transparent now. And we simply want to make sure that we have enough water to take that all the way through our next steps here, because this is a major move now to create more of a volumetric play and really have that light shine on the front elevation here. So we'll start with all the planes that face to the right. So that's all the way over here. This one actually will be a little bit darker later. We'll pull the tree behind it. And this white plane projecting towards the back over here. The whole underside is receiving less light. In that corner. The underside of our yellow balcony. The edge to the plane of this front wall. So it's not just a two-dimensional wall. You always pull it out and show the corner of it as well, to show it moving across that plane. And then the underside between this and this set of windows that are over there. And now we'll pull it over from the horizon line in the back, where the house actually casts somewhat of a shadow on the right side here, to differentiate the background plane to the foreground here. So that tone of darker grass seems deeper in the back than it does in the front towards us. And now we can go to the underside of some of the trees as they kind of cast shadow onto themselves in the distance. And then break it apart as it comes to the top. And these are going to be so far back, we won't detail them too much. We'll just have it right up to the edge of our white planes. So it's starting to have more of a presence on here as if it's luminous. And so we're going to tamp that down a little bit by saying the spaces behind the glazing are actually going to be some of the darker areas inside the composition because that's the interior space going back. So some of these lines are showing the tops of the roof lines going back to our vanishing point here on the right to show the inside ceiling there. So everything behind the planes of glass, we're going to have to put zones of information in terms of value. And again, it's just a sketch to imply the idea of planes that go, so it's not just an exterior composition. So much like this one goes back to this vanishing point, we'll have the inside of this room also do the same. Trail back this way. So we'll differentiate between the ceiling plane and the wall plane going back. So we can take our same wash that was on the exterior there and use that for these zones of interior space. This one reflects the underside of the awning here up top. Oops. So you can see the actual reflection of this being twinned inside, and that's reflecting the sky from that, so it remains quite bright. But then down below, where the windows are open, we just see the darkness of the room on the inside. And those windows are all the way open to here, so it's dark. On this side, with this tone. Oh. And it carries in the interior here. And so once that water sets up, it'll give us the basis to go deeper with the tone and to carve out some more definition on the interior. Those set up now, we'll come back into our pool of shading and shadow casting, and we're going to make that a little bit more pigment base and less water base. So again, the blue black. We'll check that to make sure it's still in the same zone. And it'll be deeper and less, more of a slightly wet wash, but probably 50% paint, 50% water. So now we can come into and give some of the detail within these spaces. So we'll come back to our right side of shadowing. We'll come to our key corner here and push the paint along that edge. And the underside over here, where it'll be strongest contrast against the white wall, and then pull that back with the water. So that plane becomes more volumetric. Take this one all the way down to the ground. And back in the distance beneath this one, less light will be received under that deck. And then we'll wash it out brighter as it sees the darkness of the nature next to it. So just like any other media, we're trying to gradate our values instead of being sort of monolithic across one plane, kind of move them directionally. We turn to the corner here. We've got the whole right side here. Make that return important in the upper right. And we can treat the upside of either the wall or the ceiling darker. We'll leave the ceiling a little bit lighter now in this case. And make the wall darker on the inside. There's a separation of those rooms going back. The underside can be darker and then deeper into the rooms. Any kind of variability will show sort of an activity behind the glazing. So again, it's not just monolithic the whole way. Nice. On this side, now we'll take that while this sets up, because we'll come back in one more time with value to push back in the interiors inside here. We'll let that set up. And so we'll come in the base of the trees, which are darkest, coming down to the lower part. And that'll anchor our whites. Again, it's an abstraction of those trees back there, but they do cast shadows on themselves. And we just want to have that variety of movement along the path of the paint. Same is true at the base here. We want that stronger horizontal plane coming across. And make sure we come down and turn the angle onto the face of the earth and move that plane towards us. And now at the fringe of the trees, to show the breakdown to the individual leaf, we can come right to the edge here and do a little bit of stippling just to give the character the framework. That once we get past the light and the mass of the tree, there is a little bit of detail of the final bit of nature in the leaf form. And that can provide some definition to the natural world. Now we can have little bits of shadowing coming off of projections of planes in space. We want to get the light to move that way.
Thank you. My husband is still recording.
And now I'll push some of the darks further into it. Take us deeper into the space. As we get towards the very end here, we'll make our judgment of the range of value by stepping away from the sort of portrait so far and see if there's enough balance between the language of the architecture and the language of light, shade, and shadow. And you can neutralize the white of the sidewalk a bit and make sure the white dominates on the architecture itself. One last little is to bring sort of your 90% now and go back to maybe truer paint and less water. You come right to the edges of things and make one last stab at making some very dark darks on the interior. And that'll follow the existing water, or you can travel a new path. It's an abstraction within the abstraction, but I think pulls across the idea of what was intended by Rietveld on the site here. And then when it sets up, we can return back to our permanent ink pen sets. Take some more delineation and make some of it stronger. So on some of the edges where you have the dry condition for it now up top, We can simply make that a bolder stroke of the black around that edge. Pull that plane off its adjacent aspect. Particularly the ones that are holding space on the opposite edge are important to strengthen that black line as a final definition. Very important corner up there. Over here as well. This is a number 5. The drafting pens. So as time allows, you can bring more of that line work into that to kind of articulate some of the detail that might not be possible with the brushwork. And there stands your sketch of a great piece of modern architecture. One of the house built out of concrete. It was too expensive to do on such a small building, so its walls are made of brick and then plastered over to appear like concrete. And that happened with several modern buildings when they thought they'd have the material of the future, but realized they'd have to make it look like the material of the future instead. And this modest addition now stands in a seminal position in the development of architecture in the modern age.